The unexpected confrontation. It started on a Thursday afternoon in downtown Los Angeles. The sun was warm, traffic hummed, and people moved through their routines like clockwork. But something different was about to happen, something that would leave the internet buzzing and millions reflecting on a moment that began with a few careless words and ended in absolute silence. KeanuReeves was walking out of a small, independent bookstore tucked between a vegan cafe and a vinyl record shop. He wore a simple black jacket, jeans, and a pair of worn boots that had clearly walked far more miles than any celebrity would typically admit. He didn't have an entourage. No sunglasses, no bodyguards. Just him, a paper bag of books under his arm, and that quiet, thoughtful expression he often carried like a second skin. A few feet away, a camera crew was setting up on the sidewalk. It was for a live streaming news segment, a small outlet known for stirring the pot on social media. The journalist in charge, Evan Mills, was a fast-talking, sharp-dressed liberal commentator, known more for controversy than for kindness. He specialized in satire, pushing emotional buttons to get clicks and reactions. Today, he had his sights set on Keanu, a man known for avoiding the spotlight and staying out of public feuds. As Keanu passed, Evan raised his mic, his eyes glinting with mischief. Well, if it isn't the internet's favorite sad man. Tell us, Keanu. How's it feel to be famous for just being nice? Isn't that kind of boring? There was laughter from the small crew. It was meant to be harmless, a joke to break the ice. But something in the tone, the sarcasm, the implication, cut through the calm air like a blade. Keanu paused. He didn't react angrily. He didn't walk away. Instead, he turned slowly to face Evan. The crowd nearby began to quiet. A couple holding iced coffees paused mid-sip. A group of teens scrolling their phones looked up. The bookstore owner peered through the glass. Something had shifted. Keanu looked at the mic, then at Evan, and finally into the camera. And then he spoke. You know, he said quietly, I don't think kindness is boring. I think it's rare. And sometimes rare things are misunderstood. Evan blinked, clearly caught off guard. So you're saying being decent is enough? Not always, Keanu replied. But it's a good place to start. I've seen a lot of pain in this world. I've lived some of it. People you walk past every day are carrying things you can't imagine. And if being kind, even just for a moment, can lighten that load, why wouldn't you? His voice wasn't dramatic. There was no anger, only calm truth laid bare in the open, and that made it even more powerful. Evan shifted awkwardly. But don't you think people use kindness as a brand? To sell an image? Keanu gave a small smile. Some do. But real kindness doesn't need an audience. It shows up when the cameras are off. There was silence for a moment, and then a voice from the crowd spoke. It was an older woman, maybe in her 70s, holding a reusable grocery bag. He helped my son, she said, 3 years ago, in a parking lot. No cameras, no reporters, just a man who saw another man in pain. I never forgot that. The air shifted again, this time with something deeper, respect, awe, even gratitude. Evan tried to recover. Well, that's one story. How many do you need before it counts? Another voice chimed in, a young woman holding a skateboard. He paid for my aunt's hospital bill, anonymously. We didn't even know it was him until the nurse let it slip. The camera stayed rolling. The live stream began picking up thousands of views per minute. The comments flooded in. Not trolls, not haters, but people. People sharing stories. People defending a man who never asked to be defended. Keanu looked back at Evan one last time. We all get to choose how we treat people, he said. Some choose cruelty, others choose compassion. I've made my choice. Then he turned and walked away. But the moment didn't end there. It exploded online. By evening, clips of the encounter had gone viral. Hashtags like Chang Keanu Kindness and Karn Quiet Strength were trending worldwide. Late-night shows picked it up, celebrities shared it, teachers played it in classrooms, and for the first time, Evan, who built a career mocking others, sat in his studio speechless as the world turned its eyes on what it really meant to be a good man in the age of noise. And that was only the beginning. The echo chamber breaks, the video spread like wildfire. Within hours, every major news platform had picked it up, some applauding Keanu's calm, others digging into the old stories that had now surfaced like buried treasure. From Twitter threads to Facebook timelines, from Reddit's front page to TikTok snippets, Keanu's moment of quiet resistance turned into a global lesson in grace. But inside a modest studio apartment on the west side of Los Angeles, Evan Mills was feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time. Silence, not the kind that calms, the kind that presses down on your chest and makes it hard to breathe. He stared at the paused screen on his laptop. It was a freeze frame of Keanu, his head slightly tilted, eyes filled with a tired kind of wisdom. Behind the frozen image, thousands of comments flowed like an endless river, most not in Evan's favor. Dude really thought he could clown KeanuReeves and walk away unscathed. Evan got owned with nothing but kindness. I felt that in my soul. Keanu is a real one. Evan, just noise. He shut the lid of the laptop and sat back on his creaky chair, running a hand through his hair. The echo chamber he'd built around himself, an audience that once applauded, his every snarky line was cracking. He hadn't always been like this. Once long ago, Evan believed in journalism, in truth, in stories that mattered. He'd grown up watching his mother, a local reporter in Chicago, interview shelter volunteers and war veterans with dignity and compassion. Her words had moved hearts. She didn't chase controversy, she chased courage. But somewhere along the way, Evan realized controversy paid better. He started twisting his reports, adding edge, poking soft spots. It got attention, clicks, sponsors, and the more aggressive he became, the louder his world grew with approval, until he forgot what his voice even sounded like beneath the shouting. But now the shouting had stopped, and Keanu's quiet words were echoing louder than any headline Evan had ever written. The next morning, Evan walked into the studio like a man preparing for trial. The staff greeted him with stiff nods. The atmosphere was different, colder. His producer, Tanya, didn't make eye contact. The makeup artist skipped the usual banter. Even the intern, usually over-eager, kept their distance. When he sat in the chair and the countdown began, the lights felt harsher. You're on in 5, 4. The red light blinked on. Evan took a breath. He could lie, spin it, call it satire, pretend it was scripted, throw in some sarcasm, maybe even joke about how the internet can't take a joke. But the truth was heavier now. It pressed against his ribs like an unspoken apology. Yesterday, he said into the mic, I said something stupid. His crew blinked. Even Tanya looked up from behind the camera. I mocked a man who didn't deserve it. I did it for the wrong reasons. I thought it would be funny, but it wasn't. A pause. The thing about kindness, he continued, is that it doesn't need a stage, but cruelty does. And for a long time, I've mistaken noise for influence. I thought speaking louder meant I was saying more. But KeanuReeves proved me wrong. His voice cracked, just slightly, but he kept going. This job gives us a microphone. It gives us reach. But if we use that power to hurt instead of help, what does it make us? I forgot what it meant to be human on this show. Yesterday reminded me. And maybe it's time I find my way back. The broadcast ended in complete silence. No claps, no cheers, just silence. But that silence meant everything. Behind the scenes, 1,000 emails had already landed, some angry, some confused, but most grateful. It was only the beginning of Evan's unraveling, and maybe his rebuilding too. Meanwhile, Keanu had gone quiet, not because he was hiding, but because he never wanted the spotlight to begin with. After that viral moment, he turned down interviews. He ignored press requests. He didn't capitalize on the fame. He just went home. But his home wasn't a mansion or a private island. It was a modest two-bedroom house near the mountains, where he kept old film cameras, a motorcycle he never bragged about, and shelves lined with letters from fans who wrote to him not about his movies, but about how he made them feel. He read everyone. And on that night, after the storm of media and madness, he sat by his fireplace, reading one in particular, a handwritten letter from a teenage boy who had just lost his mother. You were kind to her once in a hospital hallway. You sat next to her when no one else did. She never forgot. Now I won't either. Keanu folded the letter, held it to his chest for a second, then placed it with the others. Outside, the world was louder than ever, but inside, both Keanu and Evan were facing something deeper. For Evan, it was guilt, redemption, and the first steps toward healing his voice. For Keanu, it was another reminder that true change rarely makes headlines. It happens quietly, person to person, heart to heart, and neither of them knew it yet. But their paths were going to cross again, not by chance, but by choice. The chair at the back of the hall, 2 weeks passed. The storm of the viral moment had begun to settle, but the ripples it created were still moving beneath the surface of people's hearts. The internet had moved on to newer trends, louder news, and quicker arguments. But for Evan Mills, life had slowed down in ways that weren't comfortable. His show hadn't been canceled, but the tone had changed. The network removed most of the sarcastic segments. His sponsors pulled out one by one. Viewership dropped. Some people called it a fall from grace. Others said he was finally being held accountable. But for Evan, it felt like something else entirely. It felt like space, like standing alone in a room with his own voice, no audience to perform for, no noise to hide behind. He spent nights walking through old clips of his broadcasts, watching himself speak without actually saying anything. He saw the smugness, the smirks, the little moments where he could have been kind, but chose cleverness instead. He hated it. One rainy night, while scrolling through emails he had avoided reading, he found one titled, "You might want to come to this." There was no signature, just an attachment. It was an invitation, a benefit event in downtown Los Angeles, a night to raise funds for children's mental health programs. Keynote speaker, KeanuReeves. Evan stared at the screen. He didn't know who sent it. Maybe a fan. Maybe someone trying to bait him. He didn't care. He clicked accept. The night of the benefit arrived like a whisper. No red carpet. No blaring press. Just warm light spilling from tall windows, soft piano music echoing through the hall, and a quiet crowd that felt more like family than fans. Evan walked in wearing a plain navy suit. No mic. No crew. No spotlight. He didn't tell anyone he was coming. He sat near the back, far from the stage, far from the action, just another face in the crowd. He felt like a ghost floating through someone else's life, watching a man he once mocked now being honored for reasons that had nothing to do with fame. KeanuReeves walked onto the stage not with a grand entrance, but with a slow, almost hesitant step. He wasn't dressed like a celebrity. He wore a charcoal blazer, no tie, and a kindness that wrapped around him like a second skin. His hair fell just over his shoulders. His eyes scanned the room, not searching for applause, but for connection. "Thank you for being here," he said softly into the microphone. "Tonight isn't about me, it's about the kids, it's about the ones who wake up every day fighting battles no one else sees." His voice wasn't polished like a politician. It trembled, cracked once, then found its balance. He spoke of loneliness, of the pain of growing up without a stable home, of watching loved ones disappear too soon. He didn't name names. He didn't talk about Hollywood. He talked about humans. And then, something unexpected happened. "Years ago," Keanu said, "I visited a school in New York. I met a boy who had stopped speaking, completely. His teachers tried everything. Doctors gave up. But I remember just sitting with him one afternoon, in silence. No cameras, no questions, just sitting. And after 30 minutes, he said one word. Stay. His voice broke again, just barely. I stayed, and he smiled. The room went completely still. Evan stared at the stage, his throat tightening. The moment felt too real, too fragile. And that's when Keanu's eyes found him. Not for long, just for a flicker. But it was enough. Keanu didn't break eye contact. He didn't look away. He acknowledged him, with a soft nod, with a glance that didn't carry shame or accusation, but understanding. And for Evan, that was worse than anger, because it meant he was seen, all of him, and still, not rejected. After the speech, the guests mingled, sipping drinks and placing silent auction bids. Keanu disappeared into a quiet side room, where a handful of children and their families waited. It was private, gentle, intimate. Evan stayed, seated at the back, until he couldn't anymore. He got up, walked slowly. Not toward Keanu, but toward a table filled with brochures. One caught his eye. Volunteer mentors needed. 1 hour a week can change a life. He picked it up, held it for, a long time, and then a voice behind him. If you're thinking about it, do it. Evan turned. Keanu stood there. No cameras, no audience, just two men. One who had been broken and rebuilt. The other, still cracking. Evan swallowed. I shouldn't be here. But you are, Keanu said gently. And that's enough, for tonight. Evan's voice shook. I was cruel to you. I didn't even believe half the stuff I said. I just wanted to be heard. Keanu nodded. I know. Most people do. Silence. Not heavy this time, not tense, just real. And then Keanu did something that Evan didn't expect. He reached out, not a handshake, a gesture, a hand on the shoulder, a quiet act that said, this doesn't fix everything, but it's a start. And Evan, for the first time in years, felt something melt inside him. Not shame, but hope. Outside, the rain had stopped. Evan stepped into the night, clutching the volunteer brochure like a lifeline. He didn't know what would happen next. He didn't know if he could fix everything he'd broken, but he knew this. Kindness wasn't boring. It was brave. And KeanuReeves had shown him the way back to it. One silent, powerful moment at a time. The small room with a broken clock, 3 days after the benefit event, Evan Mills stood outside a modest community center tucked between 2 rundown apartment buildings on the east side of town. The building wasn't impressive. The paint was fading. The sign above the door swung unevenly in the breeze, but inside, something he hadn't felt in a long time was waiting for him. Meaning. He clutched the volunteer brochure he had taken that night like it was a passport to a world he wasn't sure he belonged in. The words on the page still echoed in his mind. 1 hour a week can change a life. He wasn't here to fix anyone. He just wanted to see if he could fix something inside himself. He walked in. The air smelled of paper, crayons, and something warm. Maybe soup or cinnamon. Kids' voices echoed down the hallway, not wild, not chaotic, just real. Laughter, footsteps, occasional tears. It was a space that didn't pretend to be perfect. And that was what made it feel human. A woman at the front desk looked up and smiled. You must be Mr. Mills, welcome. They're expecting you. He blinked. They are? Keanu told us you might show up. He didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded. They led him to a small room in the back of the center. It had a crooked clock on the wall stuck at 3:17, mismatched chairs and a circle of beanbags in the corner. No stage, no microphones. Just a whiteboard that said, Group B, ages 10 to 12, self-expression and trust. He was assigned to assist, not lead, just be there. Which for a man who had built his entire career around being the center of attention, felt both humbling and terrifying. The door opened. 5 kids shuffled in. They didn't look at him with awe. They didn't recognize his face from the internet. To them, he was just a tall, tired-looking adult in a wrinkled shirt. And strangely, that made him feel free. The group leader was a kind-faced woman named Lena, who introduced him with nothing more than, "This is Evan. He's just here to listen." Not, "This is the man who insulted a celebrity." Not, "This is a public figure." Just Evan. For the next hour, he sat in silence. He watched as one boy named Jason built a small city out of Legos without speaking a word. Another Clara asked endless questions, some smart, some silly, all genuine. A third Malik kept tugging at the sleeves of his hoodie like he was trying to shrink into it. None of them asked about Evan. They just existed. And slowly, so did he. In the following weeks, Evan returned every Thursday. 1 hour became 2. 2 became 3. He learned how to make paper planes from Clara. He helped Malik write a short poem about his dog. He watched Jason finally speak, just 3 words. When war, his Lego tower collapsed and Evan helped him rebuild it. Thank you, again. Those 3 words meant more than any award, any rating spike, any trending hashtag he had ever received. But it wasn't all perfect. Some days the kids didn't talk at all. Some days they pushed him away. Some days he left wondering if he'd made any difference. But every time he thought about giving up, he remembered Keanu's words. Real kindness doesn't need an audience. So he stayed, quietly, consistently, and slowly. Something inside him began to shift. One afternoon, as he packed up after another session, Lena approached him. You know, she said, when I first saw your name on the volunteer list, I didn't think you'd last a week. Evan chuckled. I didn't either. But you've stayed. Not everyone does. Some come to feel good about themselves, others to add a line on a resume. But you come back, even when no one thanks you. He looked around at the room. The cracked whiteboard, the crooked clock still stuck at 3:17. Maybe, he said. This place is fixing me more than I'm helping anyone. Lena nodded. That's how it works. But healing wasn't only happening inside those walls. Outside, Evan's world was changing too. He started writing again. Not hot takes or reaction pieces, but essays. Quiet, thoughtful pieces about what it means to grow, to fail, to try again. He posted one on his personal blog. It was titled, The Day Kindness Silenced Me. He didn't name Keanu. He didn't mention the viral moment. He just told the story of a man who had been lost in his own ego until a gentle soul showed him another way. The post spread, quietly, not like wildfire, more like a candle lighting other candles. Former fans reached out. Even critics softened. And amidst the comments was one anonymous line that made him pause. Saw you that night. You were different. Keep going. He wondered if it was Keanu. But he didn't need to know. He didn't need validation. Not anymore. Because the broken clock in the community center wasn't just a decoration. It was a reminder that even when time seems stuck, people can still move forward. And Evan, he was finally learning to. When the lights went out, it was a Friday evening, almost 6 o'clock. The sky was turning purple behind the city skyline and a slow hush was settling over the streets. Inside the community center, Evan stood alone in the quiet room that had slowly become his second home. He had stayed back to clean up after the group left, picking up paper scraps, pushing chairs into place, fixing the same broken clock even, though he knew it wouldn't tick again. It was supposed to be a normal night, but his phone buzzed. A text from Lena. Malik didn't go home. School called. They can't find him. Evan felt something in his chest tighten, sharp and immediate. He dropped everything and rushed outside. Malik was one of the quiet ones, a boy of 12 with deep, thoughtful eyes and a voice that barely rose above a whisper. He wore the same hoodie every week, always pulled over his head like armor. His drawings were full of storm clouds and empty buildings. He rarely smiled, but when he did, it was like the sun cracked through concrete. He had mentioned his mom in passing once. Evan remembered that moment vividly because Malik had said, "She works hard but forgets to come home sometimes." And that had stuck with Evan, like a splinter of someone else's truth buried under his skin. Now the boy was missing, and Evan couldn't sit still. He called Lena, called the school, even called the few parents he'd come to know from the center. No one had seen Malik. And then, just before 8 p.m., Evan's phone rang again. A voice on the other end, a janitor from the school. Said he saw someone matching Malik's description heading toward the old bridge on 48th Street. A place no child should be alone at night. Evan didn't think twice. He grabbed his coat and ran. The old bridge was half abandoned, covered in graffiti, surrounded by silence. A single flickering street lamp buzzed overhead like it was struggling to stay alive. Evan spotted him. Malik, sitting on the edge of the bridge with his legs dangling into the empty air, his hoodie pulled tight, his shoulders hunched. He looked so small, so breakable. Evan approached slowly. No sudden moves, no dramatic words, just a voice. Soft. Honest. Hey, Malik. The boy didn't turn. Evan took a breath and sat down a few feet away, careful not to get too close. He didn't ask what was wrong. He didn't offer a lecture. He just sat there. A full minute passed. Then another. Finally, Malik spoke. They're moving me again. His voice was flat, barely audible. Another foster home. They said this one's temporary, too. Everything's temporary. Evan's heart dropped. He had read Malik's file, briefly, just enough to know he'd been passed. Around 4 homes in 2 years, no stability, no trust, no promises kept. Malik sniffed. I thought maybe if I came here, someone would care enough to stay. Evan blinked back the burn in his eyes. I do, he said. Malik shook his head. No, you don't. You're just another grown-up who'll disappear. Evan leaned forward, voice trembling. I used to be. Malik finally turned his head, looking at him for the first time. What changed? Someone taught me that showing up, even when you feel small, even when no one claps for you, can still matter. They showed me that kindness isn't weakness. It's strength most people never dare to use. Malik looked away again. What if I don't believe that? Then let me show you, again, and again, until you do. Silence again. But it was softer this time. Gentler. Evan stood and stepped closer, hand outstretched. Let's go, kid. We'll figure it out. Together. Malik stared at his hand. And then, after what felt like forever, he took it. The ride back was quiet. No music. Just the hum of tires and 2 hearts trying to trust one another. Evan brought Malik to Lena's place, where she had already prepared a guest room. It wasn't a forever home, but it was a place to sleep. A place to breathe. Before Malik walked in, he turned to Evan. Are you coming back next week? Evan didn't hesitate. Every week. Malik nodded. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Not wide, but real. Later that night, Evan sat on the steps outside the center, under the same purple sky that had now turned black. He looked up, the stars scattered above him like little reminders that even in darkness light exists. His phone buzzed. A message. No name, just a sentence. He stayed because you did. He didn't have to guess who it was from. Keanu. The man who started all of this, not with anger, not with revenge, but with patience, truth, and the kind of quiet power that doesn't demand attention, but earns it. Evan stared at the message, and then slowly typed back, Thank you for teaching me how to be better. That night, Evan didn't feel like a disgraced journalist. He didn't feel like a man trying to escape his past. He felt like something else. Someone trying, truly trying, to matter. Not to everyone, just to one. And maybe that was enough. Visiu. Man who stayed behind. 1 year later, the sun rose over Los Angeles with the same quiet glow as the day everything had changed. But the city felt different now. Slower, softer. Like a page finally turning after a long pause. The world had moved on from the viral video, from the backlash, from the headlines. But some moments never really fade. They just settle deeper into the people they touch. And on that morning, Evan Mills was no longer the man who stood behind a mic and tossed words like weapons. He was someone else now. Someone who showed up every Thursday without fail. Someone who listened more than he spoke. Someone who didn't chase applause but chased impact. And it was Malik who reminded him of that every day. Malik had been placed in a new foster home a few months ago, this one stable, with a retired teacher who loved gardening and knew how to make a boy feel safe just by being near. Malik still had his hoodie, he still spoke softly, but now he laughed more. And sometimes he'd even sit beside Evan in the park, sketching worlds he imagined. Places with no broken clocks, no forgotten birthdays, no goodbyes. On this day, Malik was the one who handed Evan the envelope. "You got invited," he said, eyes glinting. "You're going, right?" Evan took the envelope. It was elegant, simple, no logo. Inside was a note. "Private gathering, honoring unsung mentors and silent heroes, hosted by KeanuReeves." Evan didn't hesitate. The venue wasn't a gala hall or a hotel ballroom. It was a modest community theater, old brick, ivy crawling up the walls, chairs that creaked when you sat in them. The lights were warm. The air smelled like old wood and fresh flowers. Maybe 20 people were there. Maybe less. There was no stage, just a circle of chairs. Evan walked in, unsure if he belonged. Again. But then he saw Keanu standing by a table, setting out mugs of tea like it was his own home. No cameras, no speechwriters. Just a man with tired eyes and gentle hands. They locked eyes. No one said anything. Keanu smiled softly. "You came?" "Of course," Evan replied, voice thick with memory. They embraced, not like old friends, but like survivors. Like two people who knew what it meant to fall apart and slowly build themselves back piece by piece. They sat in the circle, surrounded by others, quiet souls who had spent years lifting others without needing thanks. A woman who ran a halfway house. A man who taught chess to kids in detention. A nurse who stayed late every night because no one else would. Each shared a story. Not grand victories. Just small moments. Moments that added up to something bigger than themselves. When it was Evan's turn, he looked at the group, then at Keanu, and spoke slowly. "I used to think that power meant being heard, being seen, being followed. But now I know power is what you do when no one's watching. It's sitting next to a kid in silence. It's answering your phone at 2 a.m. because someone's scared. It's being there when it would be easier to walk away." Keanu nodded. His eyes shimmered, not with tears, but with something older than sadness. Something like truth. And then, quietly, he said, "My sister's been sick." The room stilled. "I haven't told anyone publicly," Keanu continued, "because she doesn't want pity, but it's been hard. Watching her fight. Watching someone you love carry pain and not knowing how to lift it from them." He looked down. "But sometimes, just staying close is enough." Evan felt his chest tighten. Not out of pity, but out of understanding. And for the first time he reached out, his hand finding Keanu's firm and steady. "Then we'll stay close," he said. And the room, once filled with strangers, suddenly felt like family. That night, after the gathering ended, Evan stepped outside under the open sky. Stars flickered gently above the city. The streets were quiet, not empty, just peaceful. Keanu joined him a moment later. They didn't speak at first, just stood side by side watching the lights. Finally, Keanu turned to him. "You know," he said, "the first time we met, I didn't know what would come of it. I just knew I didn't want to fight back the way the world expected me to." Evan nodded. "You didn't fight me. You saved me." Keanu smiled. "We saved each other." Months later, a new video surfaced online. Not viral, not trending, just a short clip taken by someone walking past a playground. It showed Evan helping Malik push a group of younger kids on swings, laughing as they tumbled and screamed with joy. In the background, Keanu stood beside a parent, listening quietly, smiling softly. The caption read, "Kindness is louder than cruelty. Sometimes it just takes longer to hear." The post didn't break the internet, but it mended hearts. And for Evan Mills, once a voice that echoed empty truths, that was more than enough. Because in a world that forgot how to listen, he finally knew how to stay. And so did Keanu. Not as icons, not as heroes, but as men who chose again and again to answer the quiet call of humanity. The bench beneath the tree. 3 years had passed since the day the world fell silent for kindness. Most people had long forgotten the video. The headlines were buried beneath newer, louder scandals. The digital dust had settled, and the waves of online outrage had moved on like a tide that never stopped searching for new shores. But for those who had lived that moment, nothing was ever quite the same, especially for Evan. He no longer hosted a show. He didn't want to. The lights, the scripts, the forced laughs, he had walked away from all of it, not with bitterness, but with quiet resolution. He now spent his days doing something far more demanding. Being present. He taught free storytelling classes at local high schools. He mentored at-risk kids through the same center where he had first sat in that small, broken clock room. He visited foster homes with Malik, who had blossomed into a teenager with a sharp mind and a protective heart, always carrying a sketchpad and offering quiet advice to kids younger than him. And every Sunday, without fail, Evan walked to the park just beyond the edge of the city. Not for exercise, not for distraction, but for him, for the man who had unknowingly led him home. There, beneath an old oak tree with branches like arms outstretched toward the sky, sat a wooden bench. The plaque on it read, "To those who choose compassion when the world chooses noise." It had been Keanu's idea. After his sister passed away from her long battle, peacefully surrounded by love, he had stepped away from acting for a while. Not permanently, but enough to breathe again. To remember who he was beneath the characters. He had called Evan one morning, his voice quieter than usual. "I want to plant something that doesn't need applause." Evan knew exactly what he meant. They didn't raise a statue. They didn't launch a brand. They planted a tree. And beneath it, the bench. No fanfare. Just a space. A sacred place for those who needed to sit with their hearts open and broken and maybe, just maybe, find comfort in the stillness. One particular Sunday, the wind was cooler than usual. Autumn had begun to touch the city's edges, and leaves danced around the bench like whispers. Evan arrived with 2 coffees. He always brought 2, even when he came alone. He sat down slowly, his knees not as quick as they used to be, and placed the second cup beside him. "You're late," he said with a smirk, pretending to scold the empty space beside him. But the space wasn't really empty. Keanu wasn't dead. He was just late. Again. And like always, he showed up 10 minutes later, walking slowly, dressed in a soft gray sweater and jeans, hair tucked behind his ears, his expression calm and impossibly kind. He sat down beside Evan, picked up the cup, and sipped. "It's cold," he muttered. "So are you," Evan replied. Some things never change. They sat in silence for a while, watching the clouds, watching people come and go. An older couple walked by holding hands. A young girl fell while learning to ride a bike, and a stranger helped her up. None of them knew who sat on that bench, and that's the way the 2 men liked it. Keanu finally spoke. "You know what scares me most?" he said. Evan turned. "What?" "That someday, no one will believe it happened. That you and I were once on opposite ends of a very broken world, and somehow we met in the middle." Evan shook his head. "They don't have to believe it, we just have to live it." Keanu smiled. "I like that." Later that day, as they stood to leave, a boy passed by with his mother. He looked up, eyes wide, and tugged at her sleeve. "Mom," he whispered. "I think that's John Wick." The mother smiled politely, shook her head. "Don't be silly. Those kinds of people don't come to parks like this." But Keanu didn't flinch. He simply bent down to the boy's eye level and said, "I do." The boy blinked. "Why?" Keanu stood tall, then nodded toward the tree. "Because real stories happen in quiet places." And then he walked away. Not with a hero strut, not with cameras following. Just walked. Months later, a woman sat on that same bench with her, newborn, overwhelmed by motherhood, unsure of everything. An old man sat next to her. He didn't say a word, just smiled. On the plaque, she traced her fingers over the words, "To those who choose compassion, when the world chooses noise." She didn't know who had written it, But in that moment, she felt a little less alone, and that was enough. Somewhere in the world, people still shout, they argue, they mock, they compete for attention. But beneath one quiet tree in a park, few know. By name, two men once chose a different way, not because it was easier, but because it was right. Because one stayed silent when he could have struck back, and the other listened when the world expected him not to. Because kindness is not weakness. It is revolution whispered, not roared, and they, in their own small way, changed everything. One act, one word, one boy, one bench, at a time.